Joy Reid's voice cracked through the studio air like a whip, sharp and gleaming with confidence. "Oh, Congresswoman Crockett, there you go again," she said, her laugh clipped and practiced, the kind that doesn't invite humor but asserts dominance. The studio lights seemed to burn a little brighter. The panel shifted uneasily, their polite smiles straining under the tension. This wasn't just another segment. It was about to become something else entirely. Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still, eyes focused, her posture unflinching. The calm in her face was almost unnerving against the performative rhythm of Joy's tone. While others blinked under the pressure of live television, she seemed to breathe in sync with the silence between Joy's words. Every inch of her body language whispered, "I've been here before." Joy leaned in closer to the camera, savoring the moment. "Let's be honest," she said, smirking. "Some people in Congress like to make noise, but when it's time for substance, well, things get quiet, don't they?" Her words hung in the air like bait. The panelists offered nervous chuckles, unsure whether to follow her lead or retreat into neutrality. One of them fidgeted with a pen. Another glanced at Jasmine, already sensing the shift in energy. Jasmine didn't take the bait. She waited. The seconds stretched long enough for the hum of the studio equipment to fill the room. The audience watching at home could feel it too. Something electric was brewing behind that steady gaze. Joy crossed her legs, triumphant, mistaking Jasmine's silence for surrender. "See?" she said, gesturing toward her co-hosts. "That's exactly what I'm talking about." She leaned back in her chair, satisfied, as if the debate had already been won. But Jasmine's lips parted, just slightly, her voice calm, even soft at first, a tone that carried more control than volume ever could. "Joy," she began, her words deliberate. "It's interesting how quiet sounds different when it comes from confidence instead of fear." The studio froze. Joy blinked once, thrown off rhythm. The panelists stopped moving altogether. A thin silence stretched so tightly across the room it could have snapped. But what Jasmine said next would turn that smirk into silence and leave millions replaying the clip in disbelief. The tension between Joy Reid and Jasmine Crockett wasn't born in that studio. It had been simmering for years, through headlines, debates, and subtle moments where tone said what words couldn't. Women of color in politics had learned to navigate these moments like unspoken battlegrounds. They had to. Every pause, every smile, every word measured twice, because the margin for error was thinner when the world expected you to prove you belonged. Joy Reid once represented a victory against that old order. A.E., black woman commanding her own primetime platform, once hailed as the voice who spoke truth to power. But somewhere along the way, she became part of the very machinery she had once dismantled. Her interviews began to echo the establishment tone, polished skepticism, performative fairness, and the quiet policing of passion. And now, sitting across from her was Jasmine Crockett, a mirror Joy hadn't expected to face. The topic of the night was fairness and integrity in leadership. On paper, it sounded neutral. In practice, it was a minefield. Every question Joy asked carried a subtext. Who gets to decide what fairness looks like? Who defines integrity when the system itself was built to exclude certain voices? Joy's words cut with the precision of someone trained to sound objective while still setting traps. "Congresswoman, some say your tone alienates moderates," she said. "Do you think strong emotion undermines your message?" Jasmine didn't flinch. Her reply came steady, her tone measured, not defensive, just devastatingly precise. "It's interesting," she said, "how emotion sounds different depending on who's speaking. When a man raises his voice, he's passionate. When a woman does, she's emotional. When a black woman speaks firmly, suddenly, she's angry." The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was recognition. Every viewer who'd ever been told to calm down when simply standing firm felt that moment in their bones. Joy shifted, her practiced smile tightening. "Well, I'm just saying, there's a perception." Jasmine leaned slightly forward, her voice still soft, cutting through Joy's sentence like glass. "Perception is shaped by repetition, Joy. And when the same people keep defining what's professional and what's too much, that's not fairness. That's control." That word, control, hung heavy. It wasn't an accusation. It was a revelation. The panel grew quiet again. One commentator cleared his throat, trying to pivot the discussion, But the gravity of Jasmine's words pulled the conversation back to her. The viewers could sense it, the shift in authority, the inversion of power. Because this wasn't about two women disagreeing. This was the system exposed on live television. A black woman with institutional clout trying to maintain decorum, and another refusing to surrender authenticity for acceptance. Joy attempted to reassert command, her tone tightening with forced composure. "Congresswoman, I'm not questioning your authenticity, just your approach." Jasmine smiled slightly. That's exactly what they said to every woman who ever dared to change the tone of history. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Her words reverberated beyond that studio, into living rooms, onto timelines, into the hearts of viewers who'd seen this play before. Only now the ending felt different. Joy blinked, momentarily stripped of her broadcast armor. She knew, even before the next question, that this moment would outlive the segment. Because this wasn't just television anymore. It was an awakening. A quiet rebellion disguised as a conversation. But what happened next wasn't just television. It was a turning point in who gets to define respect in American media. Before she was the face of primetime commentary, Joy Reid was the outsider, sharp, relentless, and unapologetically loud in a media world that rarely made space for women who looked or spoke like her. She built her reputation from the ground up, turning hard truths into sound bites that could cut through the static. She had been the challenger once, the disruptor who refused to play nice for approval. Her early years were electric. Viewers tuned in not just for the news, but for her conviction. Joy was bold, fearless, unfiltered. She didn't wait for permission to ask hard questions. She took pride in holding the powerful accountable. That defiance became her brand. It made her magnetic. It made her indispensable. But success changes the air around a person. The higher she climbed, the more she inhaled that rarefied oxygen of the establishment. With influence came access, and with access came the subtle pressure to protect it. The corporate suits didn't have to tell her to soften her edges. She began to sense which tones were rewarded and which were punished, and little by little, Joy Reid, the insurgent, became Joy Reid, the gatekeeper. She still spoke truth, but it was now truth filtered through a network lens, truth that wouldn't rattle sponsors or make executives nervous. Her show became the arena where new voices had to earn legitimacy, and she was the referee. The smile that once disarmed power now guarded it. There were moments her audience noticed the shift. The warmth gave way to condescension cloaked as wit. Guests who challenged her too directly were cut off mid-sentence. Rising activists who spoke from raw experience were met with the calm correction of someone who believed she already knew the lesson. Clips circulated online. Joy leaning back, smirking, letting the silence linger just long enough for the audience to side with her. It wasn't overt hostility. It was something subtler, more practiced, the confidence of someone who had learned how to win without appearing cruel. But behind that poise was fear. Fear of losing the control that defined her success. Critics began to whisper what fans refused to say out loud, that Joy had become too comfortable playing judge, not messenger. She was no longer just reporting power dynamics. She was part of them. Her show, once a platform for the unheard, started to feel like a fortress. And that fortress was precisely what made Jasmine Crockett's presence so disarming. Jasmine didn't play by the unspoken rules. She wasn't intimidated by the platform or the cameras. She wasn't performing for permission. She came from a lineage of women who didn't need validation to know their worth. That energy unsettled Joy, not because it was wrong, but because it reminded her of herself, before the filters, before the polish, before the weight of maintaining her place. Joy's trademark smirk returned in moments like this. It was her shield. Her interruptions, precise, almost rehearsed, were her sword. Each one carried the same unspoken message. I decide when this conversation ends. To the casual viewer, it looked like lively debate. To those paying attention, it was choreography. Joy had mastered the rhythm of dominance, the quick pivot, the strategic laugh, the cutting off just before a guest's point could land. And yet, beneath the confidence was fatigue. Holding control, every night, every segment, against every challenge, it wears even the strongest down. Her producers adored her professionalism. Her audience admired her intellect. But what they didn't see was the quiet tightening that came with every broadcast. a need to stay ahead, to never be outmaneuvered. And when Jasmine sat across from her that night, Joy sensed it instantly. This wasn't going to be another easy segment. There was something about Jasmine's composure that felt like a threat, not to Joy's reputation, but to her rhythm. Jasmine didn't flinch under provocation. She didn't rush to defend herself or raise her tone. That calm was unnerving. It stripped Joy of her usual control levers. For the first time in a long time, Joy wasn't directing the tempo. She was reacting to it. It wasn't malice that drove her. It was instinct. The instinct to preserve authority. The instinct to remind everyone, including herself, that this was her domain. Her smirks came quicker, her laughs sharper, her tone a touch higher than usual. She told herself it was just good television. But deep down, she knew it was something else, the subtle panic of a queen realizing her crown no longer commands silence. This wasn't about dislike or rivalry. It was about identity. Joy had built a career proving she belonged among the powerful. Jasmine represented a future that didn't need permission to enter those rooms. The irony hung thick in the air. Joy Reid had once fought for the microphone she now used to interrupt others, and across from her sat someone who knew exactly how to dismantle that control, word by word. Long before the cameras, before the trending hashtags, before the headlines that tried to summarize her in a single line, Jasmine Crockett was just a girl learning to speak up in rooms that didn't always want to listen. She grew up surrounded by working people who measured success not in money, but in endurance. Her world wasn't built on privilege or access. It was built on persistence. Her mother worked 2 jobs. Her father was rarely home, chasing bills that always seemed one step ahead. Dinner conversations weren't about politics or policy. They were about survival. Jasmine learned early that silence was easy, but it never changed anything. She carried that lesson into classrooms that often underestimated her. Teachers praised her intelligence but questioned her tone. Debate coaches loved her logic but told her to sound less emotional. Every comment was a reminder that confidence, when it came from her, was too easily mistaken for attitude. But Jasmine refused to shrink. She pushed through college balancing part-time jobs, student loans, and the quiet fear that she didn't belong. When others studied for grades, she studied for proof that she could stand shoulder to shoulder with anyone who doubted her. Law school was a battlefield of another kind. Long nights under fluorescent lights, surrounded by peers who could afford tutors, while she could barely afford rent. Yet every struggle sharpened her edge. She wasn't fueled by resentment. She was fueled by purpose. Her first job out of law school wasn't at a corporate firm with marble floors. It was in community defense. She walked into courtrooms where clients were treated like case numbers, where judges barely looked up, and where prosecutors talked over defendants as if their stories didn't matter. That's where Jasmine learned her real craft, composure. She realized composure wasn't about staying calm for appearances. It was about staying steady so truth could be heard. She learned how to use silence as a weapon, how to let arrogance reveal itself without her saying a word. Those early years shaped her rhythm. Every slammed gavel, every condescending smirk from opposing counsel, every moment she had to reintroduce herself because someone assumed she wasn't the attorney, each became another layer of armor. Her victories were small but powerful. A client reunited with their children. A case dismissed because she caught what others overlooked. A community meeting where residents finally felt seen. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was chasing fairness, and that pursuit didn't go unnoticed. Mentors saw the same fire that once defined trailblazers before her. They called her voice unshakable, her arguments disarming. When she entered politics, it wasn't because she wanted power. It was because she wanted to make sure power finally listened. Her campaign began at folding tables in church basements and community centers. No corporate backing, no polished slogans, just grit. She walked block by block, hearing stories that mirrored her own. People didn't just see a politician. They saw a reflection of their resilience. When the attacks came, accusations of inexperience, of attitude, of being too direct, she didn't flinch. She had heard those labels her whole life. She wore them like badges of confirmation that she was making people uncomfortable in the right way. By the time Jasmine Crockett arrived on national television, she had already faced tougher audiences than any newsroom panel could offer. She had faced courtrooms stacked against her, critics who mistook her confidence for arrogance, and institutions that had tried to box her into silence. What made Jasmine different wasn't defiance. It was discipline. She didn't interrupt. She didn't shout. She didn't chase validation. Her power came from something rarer, earned calm. She had learned to measure every word, not to please, but to pierce. Her calm wasn't submission, it was precision. That's why, when she sat across from Reid that night, she wasn't nervous. She was grounded. The lights didn't faze her. The audience didn't intimidate her. She had learned that attention doesn't equal respect, and that respect isn't given freely. It's demanded quietly. In the moments leading up to that broadcast, her team reminded her to stay composed, as if she needed the advice. But Jasmine already knew who she was walking in as. She didn't need to prepare for confrontation. Confrontation had been preparing her for years. She remembered the first time she had been talked over in a meeting. The first time someone called her emotional for raising facts. The first time she saw how quickly confidence could be twisted into caricature. Those memories didn't make her bitter. They made her steady. Her poise wasn't performance. It was survival. So when Joy's laughter filled the studio, laced with that subtle mix of superiority and disbelief, Jasmine didn't flinch. She recognized that laugh. She had heard it before from judges, from colleagues, from the gatekeepers who believed civility was theirs to define. But Jasmine had grown past needing to be accepted by them. Her goal wasn't to win an argument. It was to expose what the argument revealed. And as the panel's smiles froze and the air thickened, Jasmine simply sat there, back straight, eyes unbroken, voice ready. Because every moment in her life had prepared her for this kind of silence, the kind right before truth lands. She didn't need to match tone with tone. Her very presence was resistance enough. So when Reid leaned in, ready to educate her on live TV, Jasmine simply smiled, because she'd been preparing for this her whole life. The studio air felt heavier now, like everyone could sense something tipping. Reid leaned forward, eyes glinting with the kind of confidence that came from years behind that desk. She was in her element, the sharp moderator, the intellectual gatekeeper, the authority of the room. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, sat perfectly still, hands folded, gaze calm, body language saying everything her silence didn't. The topic was fairness and political accountability. Joy began smoothly, then pivoted, slipping in a jab dressed as curiosity. "So, Congresswoman," she said, voice lilting with practiced civility, "are you suggesting that criticism of leadership is somehow unfair? Because it sounds like you're saying people should be immune to tough questions." The words hung in the air, light but sharp. Jasmine smiled faintly. "That's not what I said, Joy. I said—" But before she could finish, Joy cut in again, voice rising just a notch. No, I heard you, but that's the implication, isn't it?" The interruption was seamless, habitual, like muscle memory. A few panelists exchanged glances. The camera caught one of them shifting in their seat. Jasmine inhaled, steady and slow. "If I may finish," Joy's laugh came next. Not cruel, just dismissive. The kind that said, "I've seen this before." She waved a hand lightly. "Of course, finish your thought," but the damage was done. It wasn't just the interruption. It was the tone, the rhythm, the subtle hierarchy being reasserted. Joy wasn't debating ideas anymore. She was reminding the audience who owned the space. Jasmine, unshaken, began again. Her voice was measured, low, deliberate, surgical. Accountability doesn't mean targeting the people trying to fix what's broken. It means holding everyone to the same standard, especially those who hide bias behind professionalism. For a second, silence. Then Joy's rebuttal, quick, clipped, calculated. "So you're accusing the media of bias now? Is that what we're doing?" Her eyebrows arched, the tone playful but edged. Jasmine didn't blink. "If the shoe fits," she said quietly. The air changed. The line wasn't loud, but it echoed. The panel froze for a heartbeat, unsure whether to laugh or stay still. Joy recovered quickly. "Well, I think that's a little unfair," she said, laughing again, this time tighter. "You and I both know how this industry works." "Exactly," Jasmine replied. "That's why I'm not surprised." It was subtle, almost too calm, but it landed. Joy's practiced smile flickered for just a second. She jumped back in, faster now, as if speed could outmaneuver substance. "Congresswoman, let's not pretend politicians are the victims here." "The press," Jasmine raised a finger gently, not to interrupt, but to hold space. Joy, with respect, I've spent my career defending people who don't get to speak uninterrupted. You can continue, but I'll finish when you're done. The sentence sliced through the noise. Not loud, just final. Even the crew felt it. The faint rustle of paper stopped. A camera operator shifted closer, instinctively zooming in. Joy adjusted her notes, her laugh delayed this time, awkward, searching for rhythm. "Well?" she said. I didn't mean to interrupt, but everyone knew she had. Still, Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply nodded. I know. It's a habit most people don't notice until it's reflected back. And there it was, the mirror moment. Joy tried again, faster now, her tone bright with tension. "Let's talk policy then, because surely you don't believe your critics are all acting in bad faith." Jasmine leaned slightly forward, eyes locked. "I don't believe everyone's acting in bad faith," she said. "I just believe too many confuse volume with truth." The sentence floated through the studio like smoke. Controlled, precise, impossible to swat away. For the first time, Joy didn't have a quick reply. She looked down briefly, lips pressed in a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Jasmine didn't move, didn't break eye contact. Her silence was louder than any rebuttal. It wasn't aggression. It was presence. Every interruption, every condescending laugh, every attempt to steer the conversation away from substance. Jasmine had absorbed them all like a storm absorbs lightning. And now she radiated stillness. Even the panelists leaned back slightly, sensing the balance shift. The authority in the room was no longer behind the desk. It was in the chair across from it. Joy's next words were softer, almost defensive. "I think we can agree to disagree." Jasmine smiled again, the same quiet grace as before. "Disagreement isn't the problem, Joy. Dismissing people before they finish speaking, that's the problem." And that was it. The moment, the turning point. The studio was silent. For the first time all night, Joy didn't interrupt. She didn't laugh. She just stared back, lips parted, as if searching for the next line in a script that suddenly didn't exist. And then, with just a handful of words, Jasmine delivered the line that froze Joy Reid mid-sentence and lit up every feed across America. For a moment, time itself seemed to hesitate. The lights hummed above the studio, the monitors glowed, and every heartbeat in the room aligned with the silence that followed Joy Reid's last words. Jasmine Crockett sat poised, shoulders relaxed, eyes unwavering. She didn't rush. She let the quiet stretch, let the discomfort grow roots, and then, with that same calm voice that had carried her through courtrooms, protests, and committee hearings, she began. "Joy," she said evenly, "I respect what you've built. But there's a difference between questioning power and performing fairness." Joy blinked. The smile stayed, but it was tight now, strained. "Performing fairness?" "I'm not sure what you mean." Jasmine tilted her head slightly, her tone still smooth. "You invite people like me to your platform to have a conversation. But when that conversation starts to challenge comfort, it turns into a lecture. You don't debate to understand, you debate to win. And that's not journalism, that's theater." A murmur rippled through the panel. One guest coughed lightly. Another sipped water, eyes darting toward the control room window. Joy leaned back, trying to find footing. "Well, I think that's a bit unfair. I've spent years giving a voice to underrepresented communities." Jasmine nodded gently. "And that's exactly why this moment matters. Representation isn't just about who's speaking, it's about who's truly heard." The air thickened. Joy opened her mouth, but Jasmine kept going, her tone never rising, her gaze never breaking. "See, I grew up in rooms where people spoke over me too. I learned early on that when you're calm and black and certain, it makes some folks uncomfortable. They mistake composure for arrogance, intellect for threat. But that's not my problem. That's the mirror talking back." A camera operator shifted. Someone in the control booth whispered, "Keep rolling." Joy gave a nervous laugh, glancing toward the crew. "You're making it sound like I'm the problem here, Congresswoman." Jasmine smiled faintly. "No, Joy, I'm saying this is bigger than us. This is about how women like us are conditioned to compete instead of connect. Because that keeps the same systems in charge." And that's when the room went dead still. No one breathed. Joy's jaw flexed. She wasn't angry. She was exposed. Jasmine continued, her tone almost reflective now. "You said earlier that politicians shouldn't play the victim. I agree. But when the media turns accountability into entertainment, when truth becomes a performance, it's not leadership being questioned anymore. It's humanity." The words hung heavy, suspended like glass about to shatter. Joy's polished veneer cracked just slightly. "So what are you saying exactly?" Jasmine didn't blink. "I'm saying you don't need to mock me to prove you're informed. You don't need to talk over me to stay in control. Because control isn't the same as credibility." A quiet gasp slipped from one of the panelists. Even Joy couldn't hide the flicker in her eyes. She looked down as though scanning her notes for a lifeline. There wasn't one. Jasmine pressed forward, each phrase deliberate, her cadence rhythmic like a verdict being read. "I came here to talk about fairness in leadership. Instead, I've been interrupted, reframed, and laughed at. But I'm still here, still calm, because I've spent my life being underestimated by people who thought talking louder meant they were right." Her voice didn't waver. It didn't need to. The truth in her words did the heavy lifting. Joy's lips parted. Nothing came out. Jasmine finished softly. "So if you're asking me what I believe, Joy, I believe dignity speaks for itself." Every time, and there it was, the line. The line that sliced through the performance, through the tension, through the invisible walls between power and principle. For a full 5 seconds, no one moved. The studio lights flickered slightly as the camera zoomed in on Jasmine's face, composed, radiant, unbothered. Joy stared at her like someone realizing the game had already ended. The control booth buzzed. "Cut to wide shot." A producer whispered. "No," came the reply. "Hold it." Across America, televisions caught that moment raw. No transition, no graphic, no fade, just Jasmine centered in stillness, while Joy blinked rapidly, unsure whether to smile or respond. Finally, Joy exhaled, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land. "Well, that's certainly one way to look at it." Jasmine tilted her head, her smile soft but certain. "It's not a way to look at it. It's just what it is." And just like that, the studio dynamic flipped. Joy looked smaller now, not physically but energetically. The control she'd maintained for years on live TV had evaporated, not through confrontation, but through calm exposure. Online, the clip hit like a lightning strike. Within minutes, viewers began uploading the segment across platforms. Twitter threads exploded. Hashtags emerged almost instantly. Reid rethink, Crockett clapback, dignity wins. Commentators posted side-by-side edits, the mockery and the response. TikTok creators slowed the moment down, adding captions like, "This is what grace under fire looks like." In less than an hour, millions had watched it. Some called it the most respectful takedown in modern media. Others called it the day composure went viral. Back in the studio, Joy cleared her throat, trying to recover. "Well, we'll have to leave it there," she said quickly, glancing at the teleprompter. "Thank you, Congresswoman." "Thank you," Jasmine replied, her tone serene. Always good to have honest conversations. The broadcast ended, but the silence after was louder than anything that came before. Joy leaned back, exhaling. Her expression wasn't anger. It was realization. Because in that split-second exchange, the roles had reversed completely. The interviewer had become the interviewed. The gatekeeper had been gracefully unseated, not by aggression, but by truth. Producers avoided eye contact as the credits rolled. Panelists murmured to each other, unsure how to label what they'd just witnessed. Jasmine gathered her notes, smiled politely, and stood. "Good discussion," she said quietly. It wasn't sarcasm, it was closure. Outside, her phone buzzed nonstop, notifications flooding in. Texts from colleagues, messages from viewers, mentions piling up by the second. She glanced once at the trending bar. Her name sat at the top. Below it, Joy's. For the first time in years, the hierarchy of who defined the narrative had shifted. Back inside the studio, Joy watched the playback in silence. On screen, Jasmine's face remained calm. Timeless. A symbol of composure that couldn't be edited out or talked over. That was the beauty of it. Jasmine hadn't needed volume to make history. She'd done it with presence. With patience. With truth. And as the clip replayed across the nation, on phones, in classrooms, in living rooms, it became something larger than a debate. It became proof that intellect, when anchored in authenticity, doesn't just win arguments. It changes the culture of conversation itself, because sometimes the most powerful mic drop is delivered in a whisper. But the shockwaves didn't stop at that studio desk. They erupted across every timeline and talk show in the nation. The broadcast had barely ended when the internet ignited. Within minutes, clips of Jasmine Crockett's calm dismantling of Reid flooded every major platform. The algorithm did what it does best. It amplified tension, rewired perception, and turned a single televised exchange into a cultural reckoning. By the time the East Coast hit midnight, 2 hashtags were already dominating global trends: Reid reaction and Crockett clapback. They weren't just digital labels, they became symbols of 2 Americas in conversation. Colliding and collaging live online, on Twitter or X, depending on who you asked, journalists, celebrities, and everyday viewers joined the fray. Some rallied behind Joy. She's earned her place. This was unfairly spun, they argued. Others championed Jasmine, calling her moment a masterclass in restraint, and the day professionalism became protest. A viral tweet summed it up. She didn't shout. She didn't interrupt. She just outclassed the system. Crockett clapback. Within an hour, the clip hit 10 million views across reposts. By morning, it had crossed 100 million, spliced into reaction videos, stitched with captions like, "When calm confidence shuts down the chaos." TikTok turned it into a symphony. Creators remixed Jasmine's words into spoken word poetry, cinematic edits, and even trap beats. One user layered her line, "Control isn't the same as credibility," over slow-motion footage of microphones dropping in sync with bass drops. It wasn't mockery. It was art. Meanwhile, memes exploded across Instagram and Reddit. Screenshots of Joy's frozen expression became templates for "when you realize you picked the wrong guest." Another popular meme split the screen. On one side, Joy mid-interruption. On the other, Jasmine's composed smile beneath the caption, "When experience meets ego." Cable news scrambled to catch up. Morning shows debated the confrontation like a courtroom case. Some anchors called it disrespectful. Others called it the long-overdue equalizer. Panel discussions unfolded in real time. Was Reid held accountable or ambushed? Did Jasmine Crockett represent a new tone in black female leadership? Even late-night hosts joined the fray. One joked, "Joy asked for a teachable moment and got a TED Talk instead." The audience roared. The debate wasn't confined to entertainment. Think pieces poured in from cultural critics, political analysts, and sociologists. The Atlantic published a piece titled, "When Grace Goes Viral." Rolling Stone followed with, "The Night Dignity Won the Algorithm." Each article examined the same phenomenon: how Jasmine's calm exposed a deep hunger for authenticity in public discourse. But not everyone celebrated. Joy's loyal viewers flooded her network's comment sections with defense and outrage. "She's human," one post read. "She had a bad night." Others accused producers of setting her up. Some even demanded apologies on both sides. Joy herself stayed quiet that first night. No tweets, no statements. Just silence. A silence that only deepened the narrative swirling around her. Jasmine, on the other hand, didn't post either, but her team did issue a short statement. Congresswoman Crockett believes in honest dialogue and mutual respect. Last night was one such moment. That single line became gospel for her supporters. Screenshots of it were shared over 500,000 times. By the third day, the internet had moved beyond debate. The moment had morphed into movement. The hashtag, #Crockett Clapback, was now being used by activists, educators, and young professionals to celebrate composure under pressure. Women posted stories about staying calm in boardrooms, classrooms, and confrontations. Jasmine energy, they called it. One viral TikTok trend showed people lip-syncing her exact words in workplace scenarios, turning what began as a media spat into a global gesture of self-assuredness. Meanwhile, Joy finally broke her silence in a brief segment at the end of her next show. Her tone was composed but slightly brittle. "The internet can turn moments into mountains," she said. "Let's remember, real discourse deserves context." But even as she spoke, social feeds filled with comments dissecting her expression, tone, and subtext. The internet had already written its version of events, and it was far more powerful than any clarification. The confrontation had become culture. Not because of the conflict, but because of what it revealed. A generational shift in communication itself. Older audiences saw 2 professionals disagreeing. Younger ones saw a power dynamic collapsing in real time. They weren't celebrating shade. They were celebrating stillness. That was the irony of it all. In a world addicted to outrage, it was Jasmine's quiet composure that went viral. And beneath the flood of memes and headlines, something deeper stirred. People began to ask what leadership should sound like. Should it be loud, commanding, and controlling, or measured, listening, and exact? That question outlived the clip. It spilled into classrooms, op-eds, and podcasts. College students referenced the exchange in debate clubs. Community leaders quoted Jasmine in town halls. It wasn't just trending anymore. It was teaching. The internet had done what it rarely does. It turned noise into narrative. Because amid the chaos, filters, edits, and opinions, a truth was crystallizing in real time. That authority doesn't always belong to the one holding the mic, but to the one who refuses to be rattled. And amid the chaos, a deeper truth began to rise, a reminder of what real leadership sounds like. The noise eventually faded. The hashtags cooled, the panels moved on, and new stories took over the cycle. But the echo of that night never really disappeared. It lingered, replayed, referenced in classrooms, sermons, podcasts, and family dinners. Not because it was scandalous, but because it revealed something rare in modern public life: grace under fire. Jasmine Crockett's calm didn't just silence a talk show host. It redefined what power could look like. In an age where interruption passes for intellect and outrage passes for truth, her restraint became its own rebellion. She didn't win by volume. She won by values. And that distinction became the moral compass of the moment. When Reid mocked her, the expectation, built by decades of televised tension, was that Jasmine would retaliate. That she'd match tone for tone, raise her voice, trade insult for insult. That's what the algorithm rewards. But instead, she chose something older and infinitely stronger: composure. It wasn't passive. It wasn't polite. It was strategic. It was dignity weaponized. And in that instant, millions saw that silence isn't weakness. It's wisdom choosing its moment. Viewers who'd been dismissed or talked over recognized themselves in her stillness. It was every meeting where someone's expertise was questioned, every debate where credentials were overshadowed by confidence, every broadcast where decorum masked bias. Jasmine turned all of that on its head, without ever losing her center. Her calm became contagious. Commentators later called it the elegance effect, the way true authority radiates not through domination, but through presence. She didn't demand respect. She made it undeniable. Her tone carried the unspoken truth that credibility isn't granted by gatekeepers. It's earned through consistency, clarity, and conviction. And that's what turned a viral moment into a lasting symbol. Because beneath the entertainment and the social firestorm was a deeper lesson about leadership. Real leaders listen more than they lecture. They don't need to humiliate their opponents to validate themselves. They understand that strength isn't about control, it's about command of self. That's what people remembered days later. Not the zinger, not the memes, but the way Jasmine's poise exposed the imbalance of a system that had always expected her to fold. She didn't fold. She focused, and in that she restored something sacred: faith in composure as a form of resistance. Young women across the country began quoting her lines in graduation speeches. Teachers played the clip as an example of emotional intelligence in motion. Politicians referenced her as the new blueprint for grace under pressure. What she embodied that night wasn't just a reaction. It was a reminder that you don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to belittle to be brilliant. You don't have to play by the rules of arrogance to win the game of truth, because truth doesn't shout. It stands, and when it stands long enough, even noise runs out of breath. Jasmine's response wasn't an argument, it was alignment. Her poise aligned with something ancient in human character: the instinct to meet chaos with calm, disrespect with dignity, fire with focus. That's why people kept watching the clip, not just for entertainment, but for restoration. It reminded them what integrity looks like when it's tested live, unfiltered, before millions. She didn't need to humiliate Reid. She didn't need revenge. Her victory was simpler and therefore unforgettable. She made arrogance look small, and maybe that's why the clip lasted long after the headlines faded. It wasn't about politics. It was about humanity, because there comes a point when every voice, whether on a debate stage, in a newsroom, or across a kitchen table, faces the same test. Will you react? Or will you rise? Jasmine rose. And in doing so, she gave a generation its answer. Because when ego meets elegance, history always remembers who stayed silent last. It began with an interruption, a smirk, a laugh, a condescending tone cutting through the studio air. Reid thought she was steering another spirited debate. But within seconds the balance shifted. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, calm and unshaken, and spoke with a clarity that silenced the room. Her words didn't just answer a question, they rewrote the power dynamic on live television. The moment stretched longer than anyone expected. The lights felt harsher. The crew froze. Even Joy's expression faltered as the weight of Jasmine's logic settled in. No shouting, no chaos, just truth, spoken with composure so complete it felt cinematic. The clip replayed endlessly online, but for those who watched it live, it was something deeper. It wasn't about who won a debate. It was about witnessing what happens when dignity refuses to bow to arrogance. And as Jasmine gathered her notes and stood to leave, the world behind her buzzed with noise, panelists whispering, producers scrambling, viewers reacting. Yet she didn't look back. She simply walked off set, calm, grounded, victorious. Her stride said what her silence already had. Respect isn't granted, it's earned. And once earned, it can't be taken. That's the moment to remember. That's the story to share. Because every time someone chooses composure over chaos, every time grace outshines ego, another wall of silence falls. Share this story. Subscribe for more moments where dignity triumphs over arrogance. Stand with the voices that refuse to be muted, because truth deserves the last word.